During a high-pressure engineering final, half the class mysteriously needed to use the restroom phones in hand. One student focused hard, pushing through a brutal exam. But what they didn't know, the professor had set a genius trap-a-fake Chegg answer, carefully planted weeks earlier. 14 students took the bait and paid the ultimate academic price. And the best part? The professor revealed it all in a shocking email blast. This is the story of one old-school educator who turned the tables on cheaters and taught the whole department a lesson they'll never forget. It was the kind of morning that feels like Judgment Day. Final exam day in one of the toughest engineering classes on the schedule. Everyone filed into the lecture hall, looking like zombies, coffee cups clutched like lifelines, faces tight with tension. You could practically smell the anxiety in the air. This wasn't just any final. It was the final. The one that could make or break your GPA, and for some of us, our scholarships. I found my seat in the middle row and took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. I wasn't the top student, but I'd studied hard. I wasn't about to get outsmarted by this test, or by the kids who spent more time on Chegg than in lecture. As soon as the professor handed out the exam packets, the room went silent except for the scratch of pens and the occasional nervous cough. I locked in. The first few problems were tough, but fair straight out of our problem sets, just with a few tricky twists. But then came the weird part. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something strange. One by one, students started raising their hands to ask for a bathroom pass. Not one or two like usual dozens. Almost like a domino effect, it didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. These people weren't suddenly struck with a collective case of the nervous bladder. They were heading to the bathroom with their phones tucked into their hoodies, planning to do some last-minute research. Classic move. I just shook my head and kept going. Cheating had become so common, it didn't even shock me anymore. But what did catch my attention was one specific question near the end of the test. It was problem number 17. Part I was totally fine, just a simple derivation based on something we covered in week 5. I breezed through it in about 5 minutes, but then came Part B, and that's where things got strange. It didn't feel like it belonged. The problem was oddly phrased, like it was translated from another language or written by someone who didn't quite grasp the material. It was vague, barely connected to anything we'd studied, and didn't seem solvable with the techniques we'd learned. I squinted at it for a few minutes, rereading the prompt like it would magically make more sense the third or fourth time. Nothing. I could have spent half an hour trying to untangle it, but it wasn't worth it. Only 5 points out of 100. I made a quick note explaining why I thought it was unsolvable based on the assumptions we used in class, then moved on. Time was tight, and the rest of the test wasn't going to finish itself. Around me, students kept disappearing to the bathroom. Some came back grinning. Others returned with a new sense of confidence, suddenly scribbling away like they'd had an epiphany. Yeah, real subtle. Even though I was locked in, part of my brain kept circling back to that weird Part B. It didn't just feel hard, it felt wrong. Like a trap, like it was designed to confuse us. But why would a professor do that? I brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to an old professor being out of touch or throwing in a curveball for fun. It wouldn't be until later, much later, that I realized Part B wasn't just a curveball. It was a landmine. And the explosion it caused? No one saw it coming. Cheating in college used to mean sneaking a tiny cheat sheet into your sleeve or trying to glance at your neighbor, Scantron, without getting caught. These days, it's digital, slick, practically invisible, and the king of modern academic shortcuts? Chegg. For anyone who's never used it or pretends they haven to. Chegg is a subscription-based service that promises textbook solutions, homework help, and 24/7 tutoring. But in reality, it's become the go-to weapon for students looking to cut corners, especially in brutal STEM classes. Engineering, physics, Calculus Chegg has answers for everything. And I mean everything? The unspoken truth? Almost everyone uses it. Some students use Chegg like a crutch copy-pasting answers without even reading the questions. Others, like me, treat it more like a reference tool. Check your work, clarify a confusing method, study for a quiz. But even then, it's a slippery slope. Once you realize you can look up entire problem sets online, it's tempting to stop trying altogether. And when the pressure's on midterms, finals, project deadlines, the temptation gets even stronger. In our class, it was an open secret. You'd hear people whisper about which Taya was lazy with grading, or how you could find last year's tests word for word on Chegg. During group study sessions, someone would inevitably say, "Don't waste time on this one, just Chegg it." No one batted an eye. And the worst part? Most of us assumed we'd never get caught. See, our professor was one of those old-school types. Gray hair, chalk-stained slacks, still used an overhead projector. He once asked us to submit homework printed and stapled in 2025. The man barely used email. To us, he was harmless, a relic, the kind of guy who probably thought TikTok was a brand of breath mints. So when students were walking out of the final with their phones to use the restroom, they weren't scared, they weren't worried. In their minds, they were just outsmarting the system. No different than looking up a formula or double-checking a calculation. But what they didn't realize is that the professor had been watching, not just during the test, but for months. See, this wasn't his first rodeo. He'd been teaching for decades, and he'd seen academic integrity slowly crumble in the age of smartphones. He knew that every time he turned his back, someone was probably Googling the answers. And he knew Chegg wasn't just a study tool, it was a pipeline for real-time cheating. But instead of ranting about it or reporting students one by one, he decided to do something smarter, something way more effective. He played the long game. And the students? They never saw it coming, because they'd already decided he was out of touch. That's the dangerous thing about underestimating people. You let your guard down. You assume they're not paying attention, that they're too old, too slow, too analog to catch on. But this professor? He was quietly building a trap so perfect, so tailored, that even the savviest Chegg surfers would walk right into it. Looking back, the warning signs were there. He'd made a couple of sarcastic comments earlier in the semester about bathroom geniuses and how some students have magical phones that know calculus. We laughed them off. Classic boomer professor trying to be funny. But that exam question part B of problem 17 was his masterstroke. He didn't just make it hard. He made it impossible. A fake-out rigged from the start. And the worst part? He made sure it showed up on Chegg with a believable but deeply flawed solution before the test. He knew students would look it up. He wanted them to. And when they did, they unknowingly sealed their fate. This wasn't just a test of engineering knowledge anymore. It was a test of integrity. And for 14 students, it was one they failed in spectacular fashion. Let's rewind the clock about a month before the final exam. While most students were cramming, struggling through labs, and thinking up excuses for late assignments, our professor was hatching a plan. Not just a spur-of-the-moment idea either. This was months in the making. A chess move that required patience, precision, and a bit of deception. He'd had enough. After years of watching students vanish to the bathroom mid-exam and return with oddly perfect answers, he decided to strike back. Not with stricter policies or pointless lectures on ethics. No, he wanted to prove who was cheating and make sure there was no way they could deny it. That's where his Taya came in. Together, they crafted a question. Not just any question. This one was custom-built for a sting operation. The professor knew it had to be realistic enough to belong on the final, but obscure enough to avoid accidentally catching innocent students. So they picked a topic that had only been lightly touched on in lectures, a sort of theoretical outlier that wouldn't seem suspicious to someone looking for an edge. They worded it carefully, including subtle, unusual phrases that would make the question uniquely searchable. Think of it like academic fingerprinting. If the question appeared anywhere online, the professor would know instantly if it had been pulled from his trap. Then came the setup. The TA created a fake Chegg account complete with a believable name, a few question threads, and a recent history that made the profile look legit. They waited a few days, then posted the trap question word for word under the guise of a confused student seeking help before finals. Enter the professor, now playing the role of a generous Chegg expert. He used a separate account with a well-crafted username, a few high-star reviews, and a profile that screamed authority. He responded to the question with a detailed step-by-step solution. It looked great on the surface: diagrams, equations, logical flow. But if you looked closer, it was a mess. He embedded subtle errors, false assumptions, skipped steps, a critical mathematical flaw hidden behind layers of technical jargon. The kind of mistakes you'd never make unless you copied the answer blindly. No reasonable student working independently would arrive at the same flawed logic. That was the point. To the average eye, it was just another Chegg solution. But to the professor, it was a glowing beacon. Anyone who reproduced it was guilty, plain and simple. After the post went live, they waited. Over the next few weeks, the Chegg answer quietly racked up views. The TA kept the account warm by posting a few follow-up questions and upvoting the professor's answer. Nothing flashy, just enough to keep it active, to give it that authentic study grind vibe. Meanwhile, the professor finalized the rest of the exam, slipping the trap question in as problem 17, right near the end. He knew most students would be short on time by then, rushed, desperate, more likely to take shortcuts. And as for the honest students, he accounted for them too. He designed the question so that anyone genuinely trying would either leave Part B blank or attempt a partial answer based on class principles. If someone tried and failed, they'd still get partial credit. But if someone wrote the fake Chegg answer verbatim, game over. But the genius didn't stop there. The professor embedded specific phrases into the fake solution, slightly awkward wording, a unique variable substitution, a very specific diagram layout. These were the tells like dye in the water. Anyone who copied the answer would replicate these quirks exactly, making it easy to spot. Then came exam day, and the trap snapped shut. As students poured out of the lecture hall, the professor and TA collected the exams and immediately started scanning for their markers. They didn't even need to read the entire answer, just skim for the distinct fingerprints they deplanted. And sure enough, they found them. Not once, not twice, 14 times. 14 students had reproduced the professor's fake Chegg solution almost word for word. Same flawed logic. Same unusual diagram. Same giveaway phrasing. Some didn't even bother to change the variable names. They'd walked straight into the trap, eyes wide open. By the end of the night, the professor had flagged each one. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Just satisfied. The plan had worked. Clean, quiet, undeniable. The exam ended with the usual exhausted shuffle. Students staggered out of the lecture hall, backpacks dragging, faces either pale with worry or smug with relief. Some high-fived. Others immediately began comparing answers in hushed tones. But for a certain group, the ones who took those extended bathroom breaks, there was an extra glimmer in their eyes. They thought they'd beaten the system. Again, I remember overhearing a guy behind me mutter, "Thank God for Chegg, man. That last problem would have wrecked me." I just zipped my bag and kept walking. I had no clue what was coming next. By the next morning, the atmosphere had changed. The professor's email hit inboxes like a bomb at exactly 8 a.m. The subject line was cold and surgical. Regarding final exam integrity. We were still rubbing sleep out of our eyes when we read it. Some of us never finished the email. Others read it twice. I read it 3 times. It started politely enough. The professor thanked us for our hard work during the semester, acknowledged that the final was difficult, and said he appreciated our effort. Then came the shift in tone. However, I must address an issue of academic integrity that came to light during the grading process. He explained the trap. Step by step, calmly and methodically, he outlined the exact strategy he and the TAD used, how they decrafted a unique, obscure question, posted it to Chegg under a false student account, then answered it with a deliberately flawed solution under a second account. He listed the exact date it was posted, even linked to the archived Chegg page. There was no guesswork here. This was a professor who had receipts. The incorrect solution, authored by myself, included very specific logical errors and unique phrasing, which could not have been duplicated independently. Then came the hammer. Of the 99 submitted exams, 14 included this exact solution errors and all. These submissions have been given a 0 and referred to the university's Academic Integrity Office for review. Names have also been shared with the department for awareness and future reference. Boom. The air left the room when I read that line. 14 students, 14. That wasn't just 1 or 2 kids sneaking by. That was a whole squad caught red-handed. And the punishment? Brutal. A 0 on the final. Automatic referral. Permanent black mark on their academic record. Maybe even suspension or expulsion, depending on prior violations. Social media blew up within an hour. Someone posted a screenshot of the email in the class group chat. People were freaking out. Not just the cheaters, everyone. Questions flew in rapid fire. Wait, is he serious? Can he even do that? What if someone just made the same mistake by accident? But the professor had already thought of that. His email addressed it head-on. These 14 answers were not merely similar, they were identical in structure, language, and incorrect reasoning. The probability of this occurring independently is statistically insignificant. Translation? Don't even try to talk your way out of it. The panic started setting in fast. You could almost feel the collective heartbeat of the class skip. Some students deleted their Chegg accounts on the spot. Others texted friends in a panic, trying to figure out if their answer had matched. A few started preparing excuses, hoping to appeal. But for the professor, the case was closed. The university's Academic Integrity Office took over from there. If you were on that list of 14, you were getting a summons. Not a warning, a hearing. And just like that, the final exam went from stressful to infamous. In the days that followed, rumors swirled. One student allegedly broke down crying in the professor's office, begging for a second chance. Another claimed they hadn't used Chegg directly. They just copied from a friend who had. No dice. The professor didn't budge. And why would he? He'd set a trap with clear intent and executed it flawlessly. No threats, no accusations, just cold, calculated exposure. It wasn't about punishing students. It was about proving a point. A very public one. Cheating isn't just risky. It's trackable. The most poetic part? Everyone else, those who either attempted the question honestly or skipped it entirely, got full credit for part B. It was his way of rewarding integrity, of saying, I see you. By the end of that week, the class had been permanently changed. We'd gone from eye-rolling his old-fashioned ways to respecting the hell out of him. He wasn't some out-of-touch fossil. He was a tactician. And for the 14 who thought they'd pulled a fast one, they'll never forget the day they got schooled by the professor they thought didn't he understand the internet. The ripple effect from that one email didn't stop with our class. Within 24 hours, the story had made its way through the entire engineering department. Professors were talking. TAs were whispering. Department heads were reviewing policies that had long gone unchallenged. The list of 14 names, those caught red-handed with the fake Chegg solution, wasn't sent to the university as academic integrity office. It was also quietly circulated among faculty. This wasn't done out of spite. It was strategic. The professor wanted his colleagues to be aware of the students who might try the same stunts in future classes. These weren't just one-time offenders, they were red-flagged now. The kind of students who might not be trusted with lab partnerships, group projects, or recommendations. And the timing couldn't have been worse for the students or for the department. You see, the engineering school had a controversial policy that allowed students to bring their phones with them to the bathroom during exams. No proctors followed them, no tech restrictions, just an honor system and a hope for the best. And for years, professors had grumbled about it, but ultimately looked the other way. Not anymore. This incident lit a fire. Suddenly, what had always been an unspoken issue, bathroom cheating, was undeniable. The proof was in the data, the screenshots, the phrasing of 14 identical wrong answers. The trap had exposed not just the students, but the flaw in the system itself. At the next faculty meeting, the policy became the #1 topic. Some professors argued for stricter controls. No phones allowed, bathroom trips accompanied by tests, even bans on leaving the exam room altogether. Others pushed back, worried about violating student privacy or triggering legal concerns. But one thing was clear: the old way wasn't working. Meanwhile, among students, the fallout was pure chaos. Some tried to play it cool, pretending they hadn't even read the email. Others panicked, texting group chats with coded messages like, "Did you use 17 billion from that site? And bro, I think I'm screwed." Rumors started flying. Who got caught, who didn't, who was trying to appeal. And then came the outrage. A few students accused the professor of entrapment, claiming it was unfair to create a question specifically designed to bait them into cheating. But that argument didn't hold water. No one forced them to leave the exam. No one told them to copy a solution from Chegg. They walked into the trap willingly. One especially bold student even tried to rally others to protest the decision, saying the punishment was disproportionate. That fizzled quickly once the university stepped in. The Academic Integrity Office didn't play around. Each of the 14 students received formal notifications, mandatory hearings, investigation notices, and the looming threat of suspension or worse. For first-time offenders, the best-case scenario was a failing grade on the exam and a permanent note on their academic record. For repeat offenders, or those with prior warnings, suspension or even expulsion was now on the table. And those weren't empty threats. By the end of the month, 3 students had been officially suspended for a semester. 2 more were placed on academic probation. The rest were still under review, waiting to learn their fate. The silence in class after that? Deafening. Even the most carefree students started sitting up straighter. Phones stayed in backpacks. Suddenly, everyone remembered how to do long division by hand. Study groups actually turned into studying. The incident had sent a message that spread far beyond our lecture hall. Cheating wasn't just risky. It was now traceable, punishable, and thanks to one brilliant professor, provable. And while some students were still angry, most of us felt something else: respect. The professor didn't rant or scold. He didn't make a public scene. He let the truth speak for itself, and it was louder than any lecture on academic integrity could have ever been. This wasn't just about a test anymore. It was about trust. And for the first time in a long while, students realized just how fragile and valuable that trust really is. In the weeks following the academic sting, our campus was buzzing with one name: Professor Whitmore. Before the final, he was just another senior faculty member, a quiet, slightly eccentric old-school type who still wore loafers with mismatched socks and wrote equations in perfect chalk calligraphy. But now, he was something else entirely. To some, he was a legend. To others, a cautionary tale. Either way, his reputation had transformed overnight. Word of the Chegg trap spread like wildfire, not just within the engineering department, but across the entire university. Students from other majors started whispering about that one professor who tricked 14 people into outing themselves as cheaters. Reddit threads popped up. Anonymous confession pages lit up with memes and conspiracies. Some students even started calling him the academic avenger. It wasn't long before other departments took notice. A few professors reached out to him directly, curious about his method. Others quietly admired him from a distance, maybe even jealous they hadn't thought of it first. He never publicly bragged, never posted about it, never brought it up again in class. That was the genius of it. He didn't need to. The email had done all the talking. But for all the buzz, the policy that allowed phones in the bathroom during exams? Still unchanged. That was the one thing that didn't sit right with a lot of us. Even after all the fallout, the zeros, the suspensions, the hearing students were still allowed to walk into the restroom with a smartphone and a data plan. It was like locking the vault after the robbery, then handing out blueprints to the next set of thieves. You'd think the trap would have triggered a policy overhaul. But universities move slow, and administrative red tape is even slower. There were discussions, committees, internal reviews. Months later, nothing changed. But that didn't mean the impact was lost. If anything, the unchanged policy made Professor Whitmore's stunt even more powerful. Because despite the system's flaws, he had found a way to fight back quietly, cleverly, effectively. No rule changes, no student surveillance. Just intellect and patience. From the student side, the reaction was a complicated mix. There was admiration. Even some of the people who cheated admitted, begrudgingly, that it was brilliant. He played us, one student reportedly said. I don't even blame him. That was a pro move. Others were bitter, blaming the professor for setting a trap rather than teaching with empathy. But the thing was, he had taught us something. Maybe the most important lesson of the semester. And then there were those of us who stayed honest, the ones who stared at Part B of Problem 17, furrowed our brows, and thought, what the hell is this? For us, it was vindication. For once, doing the right thing actually paid off. We didn't get an A for effort, but we did get full credit for a question we couldn't answer. It was the professor's quiet way of saying, I see you. I know you tried. After that semester, Professor Whitmore's classes started filling up faster. Not because they were easy, but because students knew they were fair. You didn't cheat in his class, not just because you were afraid of getting caught, but because you knew he respected the effort. He didn't want perfect answers. He wanted honest ones. He became a bit of a campus myth. Stories about him began to blur the lines between fact and folklore. Some claimed he had a network of fake Chegg accounts still active, lying in wait. Others said he could instantly recognize a copied answer just by glancing at the variables. A few people even joked that he had a photographic memory and secretly worked for the NSO. Whatever the rumors were, one truth stood tall. He made people think twice. Cheating didn't disappear overnight, of course. Students will always look for shortcuts when they feel overwhelmed. But the vibe shifted. Suddenly, just check it wasn't said so casually. People started checking answers with a little more skepticism. Study groups got quieter. Exams got realer. And even though the school didn't change the phone policy, the culture had started to shift because of one professor who chose strategy over scolding, intellect over outrage. Looking back, it still feels surreal that something so small, a 5-point question at the bottom of an exam, could cause such a huge disruption. But that's what made it brilliant. It didn't take a lecture. It didn't take a crackdown. It took one man quietly drawing a line and saying, no further. He reminded us what academic integrity actually means, not just for professors, but for students too. That in a world full of hacks and shortcuts, there's still value in struggling through the hard stuff, in showing your work, in being honest even when no one's watching. Professor Whitmore may not have changed university policy, but he changed how we think about cheating. And that legacy? That'll last a whole lot longer than any final exam. In a world where digital shortcuts are just a click away, one professor proved that old-school smarts still hold power. By crafting a flawless trap, he didn't just catch cheaters. He exposed a system too comfortable with cutting corners. Whether you call it revenge or justice, his actions sent a message that echoed far beyond the final exam. And for the rest of us, it's a reminder that sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one quietly planning 5 steps ahead. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real-life revenge stories that hit where it hurts.